In the heart of Windmere, a small town tucked between a silver river and the whispering woods, stood a narrow brick shop with fogged glass windows and a sign that read, E. Hart and Daughters, Fine Timepieces. The year was 1991. The world outside was learning new words like internet and mobile phones. But Windmere was still a place where the milkman came by bicycle and the church bell decided the day's rhythm. Inside that clock shop lived Elias Hart, a man whose life had become a hymn to precision. He was tall and quiet, with hands made steady by years of crafting delicate gears and coiled springs. Every morning he'd open his door at exactly 8, the sound of his bell blending into the chorus of ticking clocks inside, hundreds of them, each marking its own moment in time. His daughter Clara was 17 that winter, a girl with chestnut hair, gentle eyes, and a mind always half in dreams. She was her father's helper, the one who polished the brass faces, wound the pendulums, and wrote invoices in careful cursive. The people of Windmere adored Elias and his daughter. They said the man could fix time itself. When someone's heirloom clock stopped, Elias would whisper to it, oil its heart, and bring it back to life. And when a widow came asking him to fix the pocket watch her husband had carried through the war, Elias worked until his eyes burned. As though every tick was a heartbeat he could not afford to lose. But beneath his gentle nature was a shadow, the kind that never quite left after loss. His wife Margaret had died when Clara was 6, taken suddenly by a winter fever. The townsfolk remembered how Elias had carried her through the snow to the churchyard, how he'd come home the next morning and wound every clock in his shop, one by one, whispering through tears, "You will not stop, even if she has." From that day on, his love for time became a quiet obsession. He believed that as long as his clocks kept ticking, life would hold together. That perhaps, somewhere between seconds and silence, he could keep the memory of his wife alive. Clara grew up among those clocks, learning that time was not just hours and minutes, but emotion itself. She adored her father, but she often wondered what it would feel like to live outside the ticking walls of that shop. Sometimes, she'd stand by the river after dusk and imagine the world beyond Windmere, cities filled with color, voices, and music that didn't stop when the hour struck. She loved her father deeply, but her heart carried an ache, a hunger for more than the slow rhythm of her little town. And yet every night, when Elias closed the shop, they would sit together at the workbench. He'd give her a clock to wind, saying, "Time must always be cared for, my dear, because it never waits for us to catch up." And she'd smile, answering as she always did, "Then maybe one day you'll make a clock that does." He'd laugh, a soft, rare sound, and for a moment, Windmere would feel like the center of the universe. That winter, snow came early. Windmere looked like a painting. The rooftops glazed white, the lampposts glowing through the mist. The river froze near the bridge, and the baker's boy began delivering bread on a sled. Inside the shop, Clara helped her father prepare orders for Christmas. People came from nearby towns, bringing clocks older than themselves, each carrying stories of births, deaths, and love. Elias treated every one as sacred, but now and then, Clara caught him staring at the old wedding portrait on the wall, his eyes soft, unfocused, lost somewhere in the past. Once she asked, "Do you miss her every day?" He paused, smiled faintly, and said, "Every second." Then, as if afraid of silence, he reached for a pocket watch on the table and began winding it. Outside, the world was changing, though Windmere pretended it wasn't. A new gas station had opened near the highway, and people whispered that soon there'd be a supermarket. But in Elias's shop, time refused to modernize. The only things that mattered were the rhythm of gears, the smell of pine oil, and the sound of his daughter's laughter. Neither of them knew it yet, but that laughter, that fragile, golden thing, would soon be tested by the same force Elias had spent his life trying to master. Because time, no matter how tenderly you hold it, always finds a way to move on. It was the spring of 1993 when Clara met Matthew Turner, a young man with ink-stained fingers and a restless smile. He had come from the city to work at Windmere's post office, part of a government program meant to modernize rural mail systems. To the townsfolk, he was strange, too polite, too curious, too alive. But to Clara, he was a spark in a world that had long felt dim. Their first meeting was simple. She came to mail a package for her father, a shipment of clock parts bound for Manchester. Matthew greeted her with that easy grin and said, "You must be the clockmaker's daughter." She blushed, unsure how he knew her, but in Windmere, everyone knew everyone. He weighed the parcel, then looked up and asked, "Ever wonder what happens to all these packages once they leave this town?" She laughed softly. "I suppose they find new homes." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Or maybe they disappear. Maybe they never get there. Maybe the world outside is full of places we can't even imagine." Clara didn't know it then, but that sentence would change the course of her life. Over the weeks, they met often at the riverbank, the marketplace, or the narrow lane behind the post office. Matthew told her stories of the city, of art galleries where paintings looked alive, of trains that roared like thunder, of people who didn't just live, they dreamed aloud. Clara listened with wide eyes. The world he described felt impossible and beautiful. Elias noticed the change in her. She hummed while she worked, her letters written in secret, her eyes often drifting toward the window. One evening, as they closed the shop, he asked gently, "Who has stolen your thoughts?" "My Clara?" She smiled faintly. "No one, Papa. I'm just wondering what the world looks like when it isn't made of gears." He didn't press her, but that night, after she went to bed, he sat alone at the workbench and opened an old music box, Margaret's favorite, and listened to its tune fade into silence. Summer came, golden and wild. Clara and Matthew's friendship turned into something more, a quiet, trembling kind of love that only youth can know. They wrote letters to each other, even though they met almost daily, filling pages with dreams and sketches of futures they might share. They talked about leaving Windmere, of renting a tiny apartment in the city, of her studying art, of him working his way into journalism. But love, as beautiful as it was, began to clash with duty. Elias's health had started to falter. His hands sometimes shook when he wound a clock. He'd wave it off, saying, "Old gears get tired, that's all." But Clara saw the truth. He was aging faster than time itself. When Matthew urged her to come with him to London for a weekend, she refused. "I can't leave him," she said. "He needs me." Matthew argued gently. "He wants you to live your life, Clara. Don't you see that?" She looked away, whispering, "You don't know my father like I do." That summer ended with a storm, the kind that split the sky open and made even the river tremble. Elias fell ill soon after. His cough deep and his color pale. The doctor said he needed rest, but Elias kept working, as if afraid the clocks would stop without him. One night, Clara found him collapsed beside the workbench, clutching the small golden key he used for the shop's grand clock, the one he had built the year she was born. He looked up weakly and said, "If I stop, Clara, everything stops." Tears welled in her eyes. "Then I'll keep it all running, Papa. I promise." He smiled faintly, whispering, "Then time is safe with you." And for the first time, she realized the cost of love, that sometimes, to hold on to someone, you have to let go of the world. The autumn of 1993 came quietly to Windmere, draping the town in gold and smoke. The leaves turned the color of tarnished coins, falling gently on the cobbled streets that led to the clock shop. For most people, it was a season of beauty, but for Clara Hart, it felt like the slow ticking of a countdown. Her father's cough had worsened. What began as a faint rasp after long hours at the bench had turned into something heavier, deeper, an echo that seemed to shake through his thin chest. The doctor came twice that month and left each time with the same quiet look in his eyes. Elias' heart was fading, but Clara refused to see it. She moved through each day with quiet determination, cleaning, cooking, polishing clocks, convincing herself that everything was fine, that as long as the clocks ticked, as long as the sound filled the house, her father's heart would keep matching their rhythm. Still, there were moments that betrayed her. Sometimes she'd enter the shop and find him sitting silently at the workbench, his tools untouched, staring into nothing. "Papa?" she'd whisper. He'd blink and smile faintly, as if returning from far away. "Ah, just thinking, my dear, trying to remember the name of a melody your mother used to hum." Then he'd look at her with eyes soft and full of something she didn't want to name. Goodbye. One morning, a letter arrived for Clara. She recognized the handwriting before she even opened it. Bold, angular strokes that made her pulse quicken. It was from Matthew Turner. He'd been gone nearly a year, off chasing his dream of becoming a journalist. His words poured like sunlight onto the page. "Clara, I think of Windmere more than I admit. Of the river, of the smell of rain on stone, of you polishing the clocks while your father smiled behind his spectacles. I'm coming home next week. I want to see you. There's something I must tell you." She read the letter again and again, her heart swelling with hope and fear all at once. When she told her father that evening, he smiled, though a faint shadow crossed his face. "I remember the look in your mother's eyes when she received her first letter from me," Elias said softly. "I knew then that I'd already lost her to the future." "Papa," Clara protested gently, "you haven't lost me." He looked up from the clock he was repairing. "Haven't I?" The words hung in the air, sharp but sad, like a chime fading into silence. Matthew arrived on a windy afternoon, his coat dusted with autumn leaves. The bell above the door chimed, a simple sound that made Clara's heart stumble. When their eyes met, the whole world seemed to slow. He looked older, leaner, his jaw a little rough with travel, but his smile, that same boyish, reckless smile, hadn't changed. "I told you I'd come back," he said. "And I told you time would make you late," she teased, but her voice trembled. He laughed and reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Then let me make up for it." Her father emerged from the workshop then, his presence dignified but frail. "Mr. Turner," he said with a nod, "I was beginning to think your clock had stopped entirely." Matthew bowed his head respectfully. "Just running on a different time zone, sir." Elias's lips twitched with faint amusement. "Then I hope you've synchronized it now." That evening, the three of them sat around the table for dinner, for the first and last time together. Matthew told stories of the city, the roar of buses, the glow of neon, the endless noise that made silence feel foreign. Elias listened quietly, his eyes warm but distant. When Clara brought tea, Matthew reached for her hand beneath the table. She didn't pull away. Her father saw, said nothing. And yet the air grew heavier with unspoken truths. After Matthew left that night, Elias called Clara into the shop. The lamps were low, and the light gilded the rows of clocks in gold. "Do you love him?" Elias asked softly. Clara hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe I love what he makes me feel, like there's more beyond these walls." Her father smiled faintly. "Then you do love him." He turned toward his bench. "When your mother died, I made a promise to never let time steal what mattered again. But it seems I've spent my life trying to hold it still. You mustn't do the same." She frowned, tears pressing behind her eyes. "Papa, don't speak like that." "I'm old, Clara," he whispered, "and tired. But seeing you smile again, that's worth the years I have left." Days passed in a blur of color and cold. Matthew stayed close, helping with errands, fixing the broken shutters, bringing medicine when Elias grew weaker. He made the house feel alive again, laughter returning to rooms that had forgotten it. One afternoon, as the first snow began to fall, he took Clara to the frozen river. The surface glimmered like glass under the fading light. They walked in silence until he stopped and turned to her. "Come with me," he said simply. She blinked. "What?" "To New York, to the life I've been writing about. You could paint or write or do anything you want. You don't belong in this tiny town, Clara." She looked away. "And what about Papa?" Matthew's voice faltered. "I'll help take care of him until he's well." She shook her head. "He's not getting well, Matthew. You know that." He stepped closer, taking her hands. "Then let me take care of you. Don't lose yourself to his clocks the way he lost himself to time." Her tears finally fell. "I can't leave him. Not while he's breathing." Matthew's jaw tightened. "Then when? After he's gone? After you've spent every dream waiting for the next tick?" "Please," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned toward the river, his breath clouding the air. "I don't want to choose between you and the life I'm building." She said nothing. When they walked back, the sound of their footsteps felt out of sync. That night, the storm came. The wind howled through Windmere like a restless ghost. Trees bent under the weight of snow. Shutters banged. And the shop windows trembled. Clara stayed by her father's bedside, reading aloud by candlelight. Elias's breathing was shallow, his face pale against the pillow. "Clara," he murmured. "I'm here," she whispered. "Do you hear them? The clocks?" He nodded faintly. "They're slowing. Promise me, when they stop, you'll keep them going. Don't let my time end with theirs." "I promise." He smiled weakly. "Good girl." Lightning flashed, flooding the room with white. For an instant, she thought she saw her mother's portrait flicker, as if the paint itself had sighed. Then everything went dark. The power failed. Only silence remained. Clara rushed downstairs with the candle, heart pounding. One by one, the clocks were stopping. She wound them desperately, her fingers trembling. The tick faltered, then died. "No, no, please." She turned toward the grand clock, her father's masterpiece. The pendulum was still. The candlelight flickered on its glass face. Reflecting her own terrified eyes, she grasped the golden key, but her hands were shaking too hard to turn it. She whispered through sobs, "You said they wouldn't stop. You promised me." The silence answered. She stumbled back upstairs. Her father lay motionless, his expression serene. The candle flame trembled beside him, and in that dim light she saw the golden key in his open palm, the one from the clock downstairs. He'd carried it with him, as if he had taken the last of the ticking with him into whatever lay beyond. She knelt beside him, shaking. "Papa, please." Her voice broke. "I'm not ready." But time, as he'd warned her all her life, never waits. Outside, the storm began to calm. Inside, Windmere's clocks slept, for the first time in 50 years. And in that vast, perfect silence, the only sound was her heartbeat, a fragile, human rhythm that refused to stop. The funeral took place on a gray January morning. Snow fell in gentle flakes over the churchyard, softening the outlines of grief. The townsfolk came in quiet procession. Bakers, farmers, children who'd grown up listening to Elias's clocks. Matthew stood by Clara's side, his gloved hand around hers. She didn't cry, not in front of them. Only when the last handful of soil struck the coffin did her composure shatter. That sound, that dull final thud, stayed with her forever. Afterward, she returned to the shop. The clocks still sat silent. For days she couldn't bring herself to wind them. The air inside smelled faintly of brass and dust and absence. On the third night, she sat before the grand clock. Her father's words echoed in her mind. Time never stops, Clara. It only changes hands. She picked up the golden key. Her hands shook as she wound the clock. Once, twice. Tick, tock. The sound filled the room like breath returning to lungs. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I'll keep it running for you." Matthew stayed for a while, helping her through the early weeks, fixing things, running errands, making sure she ate. But Clara was distant, her grief turning inward, heavy and private. One evening, he told her quietly, "He's given me another offer, the last one." She looked at him across the table, at the man who had loved her through time and distance. "Then you should take it. What about us?" he asked. She smiled faintly, a small breaking thing. Some things aren't meant to move at the same pace. He tried to protest, but her voice stopped him. "Go, Matthew. Don't let me be the reason your clocks stop too." He kissed her forehead, and for a long time they stayed that way, two hearts caught between seconds. Then he left. The years that followed were slow, steady, and strangely kind. Grief softened into memory, and memory became routine. Clara ran the shop alone. She learned to fix more than clocks, watches, music boxes, old radios. She became the keeper of Windmere's time. Children who once visited with their parents now came as grown men and women, asking for her gentle touch to restore what was broken. They called her Miss Hart, though to many she was simply the clockmaker's daughter, a name that had become a story in itself. In the evenings, she would light a single lamp, the golden glow reflecting off brass faces. She'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and watch the townsfolk pass. Some nights she imagined Matthew among them, his coat collar turned up, his steps still quick, but letters stopped coming. The post office closed when Windmere got its first internet cafe. The town grew noisier, younger, faster. Clara remained still, a remnant of another age. Sometimes she'd hear the children outside mocking the steady ticking from her windows. That's where time lives, in the clock shop. She'd smile faintly, whispering to herself, "Maybe it does." One stormy evening in 2002, lightning struck the old elm near the shop. The power went out, plunging the town into darkness. Clara moved through the rooms by candlelight, checking each clock. The silence was suffocating. Then she heard it, a single clock still ticking, faint but steady. It was her father's masterpiece, the grand clock. Its pendulum swung, slow and sure, though no key had wound it in days. She watched, heart pounding. The minute hand crept forward. She swore, just for an instant, that she saw a reflection in the glass. A tall figure, smiling softly, eyes kind. "Papa?" she whispered, but the figure faded with the next flash of lightning. Years passed like ripples, gentle, widening, unstoppable. By 2010, Clara was no longer the young girl who had dreamed of running away. She was 40 now, her hair streaked with silver, her hands still steady. The shop had changed little. Time had found a home there. One morning, while sorting through an old drawer, she found a letter, yellowed with the ink fading. The postmark was foreign, the handwriting unmistakable. Matthew Turner. Her breath caught. The letter had been misplaced, perhaps fallen behind a drawer long ago. She opened it carefully, her hands trembling. "Clara, I don't know if you'll ever read this. New York is beautiful, but it's also lonely. The lights never stop. The noise never ends. I used to think time moved faster here, but now I see it's just louder. I miss Windmere. I miss the quiet. I miss you. If you ever forgive me for leaving, I'll be waiting. Matthew." She read it again and again, tears blurring the words until they melted into one another. He had written it 5 years ago. She never replied. The return address no longer existed. That evening, she stood before the grand clock once more. Its pendulum had slowed. The brass face had dulled with age. She picked up the golden key, the same one her father had held the night he died, and began to wind. The tick returned, steady and calm. "Time never waits," she whispered, "but love somehow lingers." Outside, snow began to fall. Through the window, the town looked like it had in her childhood, soft, still, timeless. A young boy passing by stopped to stare at the shop. He pressed his nose to the glass, watching the flickering candlelight within. For a second, he thought he saw someone beside Clara, an older man in a work apron, smiling faintly. When he blinked, the man was gone. Inside, Clara sat by the window, watching the snow gather on the sill. The clocks ticked in harmony, hundreds of hearts beating in the quiet night. Somewhere, far away, a train passed through another town. In a seat near the window, an older man with gray hair and a weathered coat watched the countryside blur by. Around his neck hung a pocket watch, worn smooth with time. He opened it, listening to its faint ticking, and whispered, "Still running." He didn't know why, but at that exact moment, he felt at peace. Back in Windmere, the clock struck midnight. The sound rolled across the town like a lullaby. And in the heart of that little shop, time, tender, relentless, forgiving, kept moving forward. The end.